gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Mike Steep.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thank you. Well, we have a lot to cover today, so we're going to get into this very quickly. This presentation will be made available to you because it has a lot of content. And what I'm going to do is summarize key points so we don't have to go through all of it. So it'll be available for you offline. And in particular, there are a couple of videos that I think you would find really interesting, including a new technique for manufacturing sensors that can reduce the cost of sensor technology by 85%. It's a radical new approach and is now pragmatic. It's within 18 months of commercialization. So when you go through this today, we're going to break it out into 5 major areas. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about what's happening at very top level. You all should be very excited because this is going to have direct impact on your companies and on your industry. I mean, I can't imagine a better position to be in than a material sciences company working on all this, composites company. And then the other pieces of the presentation will step us through, show you real case examples. So whatever you see isn't conceptual, it is commercial in these presentations. Other thing we're going to do is talk a little bit about some of the issues that this raises in terms of technology growth, but then again, how you also can create change within a company using some tools that we've started developing with our corporate clients. So a lot of material. So let's get started by kind of talking a little bit about today's discussion. You already heard about me. That was fast. I have been in the industry for 35 plus years. I've seen every major transition that has occurred in technology since I started right out of graduate business school in 1980 of all time. Yeah, and I don't have much gray hair either, which is really remarkable considering the huge volatility of the technology industry. It's still more exciting now today than probably at any given point in time in the last 35 years. We are experiencing what can only be characterized as a revolution, a renaissance in technology development globally. We've had more invention and innovation occurring globally in all these different areas than at any other time in history. So when I came into the technology business in 1980, we had a singular vision. We talked about either developing a computer, a piece of hardware, or some software, or perhaps we were thinking about networking, but never in our thought process was the idea that all of this, everything from hardware, technologies, to analytics and data would be combined in a continuously connected world. So the big thing you need to remember is the word convergence more than any other. We are seeing converged technologies across the board. So if I'm a world-renowned professor, let's say at MIT, developing a new hardware technique, you can bet your bottom dollar that he or she is also working on predictive analytics to figure out a way to take data off of the system, also designing software for manufacturing, all in the same lab. So convergence is sort of like taking 1 + 1 and getting 5. Because what it does is it accelerates the explosion in technology development in a way that we can gain insight from what we're doing. So the thing about it is this: for composites and for advanced materials, it's no longer big data connected to that, it's also insights from data. We've moved off of big data. Now we are really concerned about what kind of insight can we gain from having sensor materials inside of all of these different types of products and services that we're developing. This is an example of what's going on. This is a snapshot of Silicon Valley. In a nutshell, just at Stanford alone, there are over 500 technology labs crossing all of these areas. Not one of these areas, all of these areas. So as an example, we're developing new materials for semiconductors that can be implanted in the human body that can detect a heart attack hours before it happens for people at high risk. So that has sensors, it has the ability to withstand body fluids, among other things. And it has to be highly reliable, and then you have to be able to take data off of it and analyze it. So it's almost like implanting a mini lab inside of your body, where you have not just a semiconductor, but you also have the ability to analyze proteins as they move through the bloodstream to identify if there's going to be a problem with the heart that is about to occur. So all the way across the way, we're going to talk a little bit about infrastructure, because sensors now can be put into concrete, they can be put into clothing, they can be put into metal for aerospace applications. And in one case, the extremes of temperature no longer apply for a lot of what we're working on. So you're going to hear about Dr. Chang and his work in the presentation, but 175 degrees at the top end to minus 70 below, and the sensors are fully functional. Huge range. That means you can put them in oil pipelines, you can put them to look in clothing, you can put it in aerospace. What he's done is actually put sensors enmeshed in metal on Boeing and Airbus aircraft. Why? Because he can actually detect hairline cracks in the wings as they develop. You don't have to take the airplane off of the service to x-ray it anymore. In fact, you could even connect up the sensor data from the composite material to fly the aircraft in the most efficient way. So the wing actually flies the aircraft. So everything that we see here is interconnected. And perhaps one that's also creating major social issues. So if you look at Silicon Valley as an example, it has the most expensive housing in the country. A lot of people who have wealth have left the valley, and the disposable income has been dropping for a lot of people who work there. So even though you have all this massive development of technology in Silicon Valley, there's also the other edge of it, which is a lot of it is creating huge wealth for a very small percentage of people who have stock options, who own companies, who are in that particular space, high expertise level. But the people who service, everybody who provides services, are being left out of the picture. And so one of the things we're trying to work through is how do we actually fix that problem, because a lot of it has to do with culture and how people think about their lives and education, everything along those lines. So the startup ecosystem in early stage technology now has 40,000 startup companies between San Francisco and San Jose. That's roughly a distance of about 45 miles. And we have over $1 trillion of venture valuation for those companies now. So there is a massive concentration there, but there's also big concentrations of technology development in China, in Japan, and in Europe. So it's no longer just Silicon Valley where a lot of the technology is being developed. It's global. And so one of the challenges in the future will be to offset some of the issues that we're having on the political side, China in particular, with the practical aspects of technology development that's occurring in places within the mainland we can benefit from. All right, so what if we took all of this and added it up? How big of a change really is all of this? This is a crazy graph. You don't have to worry about this. All you have to do is look at the red line that's going straight up, or practically straight up. That's an exponential curve. So if you took all of those 40,000 startups and you map them out from the last 10 years of development, like for example, 20 startups in robotics and another 100 in material sciences or whatever it might be, this is what you get. You get curves, waves of technology development that when you add them together create this massive growth, especially when you go global with this chart. So that exponential curve, the thing that you need to know is, that's why I call it a renaissance, because we've never seen anything quite like this before. But the problem is the dashed line. The dashed line is our ability to keep up with it all and manage it. And perhaps the best example of this is in cybersecurity, where bad actors are able to use the technology, especially machine intelligence, to penetrate the most sensitive data of any organization, and we don't have the tools really to prevent that from happening yet. And so the unintended consequences of all this is the technology, good, bad, or indifferent, can be used to either promote opportunity or it can also be a problem, but everybody's experiencing the same issue of that dotted line. How the hell do we keep up with all this? And I'm sure you're thinking about this in terms of implications for your children and grandchildren. And I've become really worried because my Jack Russell Terrier is now banging the nose against the iPad to get squirrel movies. And I'm beginning to wonder, I saw it in my grandkids, now I'm seeing it in my Jack Russell. Have we gone a bit far? She would argue no, as long as she sees squirrels. But in any event, so one of the things that we have to deal with coming away from this conference is we got convergence, you got massive exponential growth, but you got this problem of trying to keep up with it. You're trying in your company to maintain earnings growth and revenue growth, so then how do you absorb this technology where it is beneficial and can be managed in a reasonable way into your company? So part of it is first understanding what we're talking about when we say disruptive technology. And when we say disruptive technology, what we mean by that is technology that fundamentally changes an industry business model or financial system. We're not talking about conceptual stuff, things that are 5 years, 10 years into the future. We're talking about technology that's within 18 to 36 months of commercial viability that changes the way we think about business models. So I'm going to reiterate this as we go through some of the case examples and show you what I mean by that. Think about the iPhone when it was first introduced. In 2007, if you looked at some of the big business magazines, one in particular, they had Nokia on the cover. And the key question being asked on that cover was, who is going to catch up to the cell phone king? They were predominant market share. There was no Apple iPhone until later in that year. And then all of a sudden, Steve Jobs came along, introduced the iPhone in end of 2007, and everything changed. Nokia lost not only all of its share, but essentially started a huge decline in revenue over a couple of years. They could have predicted it, but the culture inside the company was, well, how could it be possible that with all the success we've had, we could have an outside challenger, especially Apple, that doesn't really understand cell phone technology? They actually said this, come and challenge us from the outside. And they began a partnership with Microsoft. Microsoft eventually acquired them, and then the whole thing went into the tube. Microsoft lost $7 billion in the acquisition. They saw their own Windows Mobile market share go from roughly 13 points of unit share down to 1/2 of a point. Laid off 32,000 people, wrote off eventually $14 billion, and they exited the mobile business. And Nokia also gone. So that's what we mean by disruptive technology. Technology that comes in and fundamentally changes the business model. What did Apple do? They created a new value proposition. They created a value around entertainment, social media, when Nokia was thinking about the cell phone as a cell phone, a communications device. That's all. We want clarity of signal. They spent a ton of money on R&D on radio technology and zero, really, on taking their operating system to support new entertainment. So they got caught. And so it's not just small, medium-sized companies that go through this transition, but large ones. Here's part of the problem. There are two different worlds that we live in when it comes to R&D. One of them is the R&D that corporations develop to maintain their own product growth and earnings. Okay, so last year, we spent about $2 trillion worldwide, but we only spent $200 billion, only less than 10% of that number, on disruptive technology, new stuff. Really small number, flat pretty much in terms of growth rate. Outside of R&D, we spent nearly $300+ billion, 100% dedicated to disruptive technology. And it's in a different place. It's in startups, it's in venture, it's in government funding for R&D, it's in commercial labs like PARC, Xerox PARC. It's in commercial labs like SRI, for example. In Europe, there are equivalents. And that number is growing at a double-digit rate. What's really interesting about this is they really are two different planets, and there's no bridge. So not surprisingly, if you're sitting there at Nokia, for example, back in the 2007 timeframe, you're not even aware of what Apple's doing. It's in another world, Silicon Valley. And so a lot of CEOs are being challenged by this because we just finished a major survey of roughly 400 companies and 4,000 executives on innovation, topic innovation, which, by the way, means all things to all people. It's sort of like a latte, different flavors for different folks, but no one really understands it. And here are the results from the CEOs. Roughly 95% of the total CEO executive suite said that innovation was critical to the success of the company. But 74% of all of their new R&D projects, that 10% number, fail. It's the highest failure percentage in almost a decade. The third point that they made in the survey was that people are really risk averse. They can't get their R&D to become more risk-taking inside the organization. And there's a lot of good reasons why people aren't taking the risk, which you and I could discuss over a cocktail. The other thing that they said was, not only can we not find the expertise, we can't actually bring talent from some of these startup companies, and we just don't understand that. Why wouldn't an engineer at a startup company be interested in coming, for example, to work for, 3M? And so this disconnect between the world that a lot of our leaders live in for corporate R&D with this outside world, it's almost a no holes barred world of casino gambling, which is actually now having a better success rate on the venture side than corporate R&D. How's that even possible, considering that the risk level is off the scale in some cases? So everything's changed. So when I went to Stanford to create this new program called Disruptive Technology Program, the goal was to build a bridge. And I thought, if people were just aware of the fact that this is happening, maybe we could connect the dots between the labs at Stanford and at MIT and all the stuff in digital development within Silicon Valley and show them what's happening in their industry. And that would be enough to shake things up. Boy, was I wrong. I'll give you an example. We had one of the world's largest manufacturers of windows come in to Stanford, and they wanted us to create a smart window. 3 CTOs, brilliant guys, all 3 males, 40+ years each in the industry, so at the tail end of their careers. They just wanted to develop a smart window. So what's a smart window? From our point of view, a smart window means you enmesh sensors in the glass, and you can then measure everything that happens inside of the room. Like, for example, energy use, HVAC controls. Because once you enable the sensors and they're all networked, everything's connected, you can now have a very different business model. So instead of just selling a dumb window, you can do a subscription service where you can provide a customer a new way of thinking about what happens inside that room, whether it's energy related or otherwise, at an 85% cost reduction on the sensor technology than just 5 years ago. So we presented all this, and we were able to build a commercially viable system within about 6 weeks, not 6 years, which is the typical R&D cycle of this company. 6 weeks. The biggest problem coming back from the customer point of view is, how do I explain this to my own management team? because my CEO is not going to really understand that we couldn't do this ourselves with all of our expertise. But actually, yeah, there's still really talented people inside the R&D organization. They should not be discounted, except that they've got the wrong expertise. So we went back on the survey again and re-asked the questions of the CEOs and said, what do you really think is going on inside of your R&D organization that is creating this problem? And they said, well, you know what? We're picking the wrong projects to work on. We get caught by surprise all the time. That's why we have such a high failure rate. Well, would you know what projects to work on then? And then if you did, would you then have to bring in new talent? Oh, that's a huge amount of change. I don't think my company could handle that. Maybe we should do an acquisition. Okay. So this is the big issue that's going on, because that little thing on the left, that big ball, is going to get huge. And here's why. There are roughly 1% of the wealthiest families in the world have $13 trillion available to them to spend. That's $13 trillion. We just had a family office conference. They're called family offices at Stanford. And we brought 100 of these principals in. And what they want to do is get into early stage technology development. And their timeframes aren't the same as a venture capitalist. I hate to use the term patient money because it's not really true, but it's more patient than venture money is. They can go a long way. And they also want to do social impact. But they all live in missile silos, so to speak. They don't communicate with each other, and they don't have a coordinated strategy of investment. And I like to refer to a lot of their investment committees as the business prevention team, because that's sort of how they operate. They try to protect the principal from making any bad mistakes. The very first thing you don't do if you're trying to do innovation. So we started exploring this and saying to them, well, suppose if we gave you a mission in life. We're going to use material sciences to solve a lot of the problems with climate change, and we're going to do decarbonization. Does that sound like a great goal for your kids, the next generation of leadership, and you? Oh yeah, we never thought about that way. Are there enough startup companies, in that space? And then we started showing them the number of companies that are doing decarbonization worldwide. Huge. And they need money for investment purposes to accelerate what they're doing. So we started connecting the dots. And what we're learning about that is that maybe one of the things we can do to help solve our problems with climate change is actually to get these guys to rifle shot focus on financing startup technologies crossing every major area of decarb, which means material sciences, to be able to address the climate change problem. They can get a return on investment, and they can infuse it with a huge amount of capital that we don't have right now. And that's what we're working on. It's one of the projects. So this exponential invention is also exploding data. And in fact, it's a big problem, because by the time you actually gather data from a device, half of it's obsolete within 18 months. Half of it is obsolete within 18 months. Yet we keep maintaining it. There is, for virtually no weed and feed program in corporates to get rid of stuff that they don't want anymore, because they believe that the cost is actually near zero to store it, so why get rid of it? Well, here's the problem. It's mostly unstructured. You cannot actually understand what the data is anymore. Big problem, especially with Microsoft and some of the other big players. Not only that, but the data is not only irrelevant, but it actually does have an economic impact on the IT spend budget. In fact, as an example of that, just in the healthcare system alone, this is going to blow your minds. We used to spend 19% of our GDP on healthcare, and now we're spending 23% just in a couple of years. What if I told you that 20% of all healthcare costs is for the maintenance of data, of which there is zero, really zero value? So you see what the problem is here. So big data used to be a buzz term in Silicon Valley. Now it's weed and feed and look for insights, because algorithms can help you sort through the needle in the haystack to find an answer to it. And a lot of what's happening with technology is this. We've become a consumer society, whether we realize it or not. And so these devices, including the one I have on my right hand, which I refer to as a computer, this is my watch, piece of jewelry, computer, tracks everything in my health, and is collecting an enormous amount of data to such an extent that consumer devices are about to exceed the amount of data being produced by most corporations on the enterprise side. Huge. And you know what? No cybersecurity. Apple says there's privacy for you, but the data is getting shared all the way across the board, even if it's not personal data. And this stuff is going into corporates, and the bad actors are beginning to realize that this is sort of a great entryway to get to your personal information by putting a botnet in there, in some cases with your kids, with their video games, to go explore what bank accounts you have, and then move into the bank through your video game that the kids are playing. So huge issues here, lots of benefits. And yes, I even have the toothbrush that calculates data and gives me an essence of what I should be doing for better dental care. I don't think it actually has made much difference in that case. But anyway. All right, so another example. This is a new type of shirt. It's made of metamaterials, which you have probably heard about. Metamaterials are a new kind of scientific material that manages energy as it strikes the material. Energy produced by all of the waves that are bouncing around our heads, from cell phone technology, you name it. So what it does is it harvests energy directly from the atmosphere and then powers the shirt, very low voltage. So what does the shirt actually do? Well, let's go look at that medical cost thing that we were just talking about. All right, this shirt is about $500 to produce as a prototype, not in quantity, but as a prototype. So 500 bucks, what can it do? I can wear this shirt in the hospital, or I can go home after my surgical procedure, and what does it capture? It connects up to the internet at home, and it transmits everything from heart rate, working on blood pressure, and other types of episodes for chronic illness. So a company like Medtronic, who could see this as a product or a service, doesn't have to send out someone to go figure out what a patient's vital signs look like once they've been released from a hospital, which costs them $250 a visit and costs the patient $1,000, if you can believe it, almost three times as much. So this is going to change business models. This is being incorporated into other kinds of applications. The neat thing about convergence is it just doesn't apply to one thing. You can cross industries with it. Really important. So when we talk about a metamaterial shirt, we can also talk about a metamaterial roof, which increases insulation without any other, the cheapest way you could actually get a 10-degree drop Celsius in insulation material from roofing. As long as it faces the atmosphere in some way and is not confined into a small room, it can generate power and do its thing. So this is now in commercial development. There are 3 companies that are working on it, one of which is a German company, chemical company. And that's as a direct result of working with the university labs at both Stanford and MIT. All right. The metamaterial was actually developed by trying to understand how safari desert insects, were managing the heat. And they discovered that the wing design, nature's design, was actually helping get rid of the energy and redirecting it. So that got translated into a material that becomes a metamaterial that allows for you to do some really strange things that are super cheap. Like, for example, you can put this, if you go to Palo Alto right now, on the roof of the Park building, It's got a tarp that is across the building. I think it was made for about $10,000, a prototype, and it covers the whole roof of the building. And they've seen a drop of about 8 degrees centigrade from just having the tarp on the building. So the energy is redirecting heat away, but also harvesting energy as well. So imagine now combining this with other types of material sciences in building and construction. So this is what I mean by convergence. It crosses. The same sensors that go into window meshes are being used by a company called Rios in Palo Alto that's making industrial-grade robotic skin. Sounds kind of creepy. Well, actually what it is the robotic skin has enough sensor material in it, and it's hooked up to a back-end AI engine. Why is that important? Simply put, I'm a worker in a manufacturing facility. I put a cup of coffee down in the wrong place, and something happens. I stop the assembly process, or some part is missing, whatever it might be. The robot with the robotic skin, literally a glove that's placed on an existing robot with some modifications, can now anticipate and react without human intervention. So the goal is to make robots autonomous enough to make a select group of decisions on their own when they encounter new problems that are developing. In the medical application for this is surgery. So Stanford's medical school is now experimenting with a new type of robot that can perform super delicate surgery that a normal surgeon would not be able to do without a lot of risk. So what do? What's different about this from the material in the window or the material in the shirt? Well, this is purposed, but it's basically the same concept. We're converging, low-cost sensors with a material of some kind. Maybe it's a shirt, maybe it's in an airplane, and we have some way of reading the data that it produces, evaluating it, and then deciding what to do next and retransmitting the information. So this convergence of materials started a couple years ago. I'll give you an example. So this is a thing at Park where we were doing a lot of new commercial work for companies, including Airbus. Up on the upper left is a liquid filled with semiconductors. You spray it onto a material, and then you take a magnet underneath the material, and it aligns itself into a circuit board. So it was an attempt at the lowest possible cost to do manufacturing of a semiconductor. Simple idea. You know where it came from? One of our engineers' kids who was playing around with spray and told the scientist, "Hey, Dad, why don't you just simply spray smart stuff onto a material and align it with a magnet?" Whoa. I wonder if he got a patent for that. I don't know. But that's sort of how it started to develop. And the next stage of it is how to network it and connect it. This is the example of how to use metamaterials in glass to reduce the temperature of a building. Now, keep in mind, what's the cost of this? You don't have electrical connections. You don't have any chemistry. Essentially, what you're doing is putting a new kind of material that has certain properties that in and of itself will perform. So it can hugely reduce the cost of construction once it's finished and building maintenance. And if you want to see that, I can put you in touch with Park, and they will talk to you about for your company. Okay. There's Dr. Chang, really interesting guy. Hobbyist, loves aerospace. Built model airplanes when he was a kid, loved it. Went over there, and he said, "I'm working on a new problem, and I want to put sensors in an aircraft, but the temperatures are so extreme on the wing, we have to reinvent it." So he did. He created a new type of looks like a CD. People know what a CD is anymore? It's a little round disc. And it breaks apart into little sensors connected. It's like a hairnet with little connectors. And you take the hairnet, the mesh, and you literally push it into what looks like a frame, and then the frame pushes it into the material, right? So why the 85% reduction? Because his manufacturing process completely changed the whole dynamic of how actually to take conventional sensors, off-the-shelf sensors, and integrate them with new sensors that can manage them, and then figure out how to do, and then the net becomes a network. So all you have to do is connect it up once you get it into the window, and it's wireless. So he's putting his sensors in airplanes. Of course he is, because that's what he enjoys, right? So we started talking to him, and this is a very typical problem in a lab. What happens if you put this in a shirt? Can you put it in a shirt? Never thought about it. Yeah, you can put it in a shirt. I said, what happens when you put it on a road in cement? Yeah, you could do that. Okay, so we just identified 3 different industries just in 2 seconds. Why aren't you doing that? Well, because I like my hobbies, airplanes. So, okay, your hobbies, airplanes, but would you mind if you licensed the technology to corporations so they could actually play with this a bit? I wouldn't mind it. What's a deal like that look like? World-class professor, no business experience really, just getting into commercialization, which is a good thing, who's invented something that could really fundamentally change things. Well, he's now licensing the technology, and it took us a while to do that. Because that bridge I showed you before, it's not just one way. The scientists on the other side don't have the experience of working with businesses. They don't understand business models. And so that's a major encumbrance. All right. So I asked them, what are kind of things you have in the lab? Well, we're working on a new type of girder. So instead of thinking about a girder as a girder, think of it as an integrated battery and girder. The girder actually is the battery. Okay, so what do you do with it? So we go to Bechtel. Huh? Bechtel says, is this actually possible? Yes. How long? About 2 years from start to finish. How long will the battery last in the girder? 15 years. How much battery juice, how much juice can we actually generate? If you put 4 of these or 6 of these in a structure, you can actually create building independence if you put a solar roof on it. So in other words, you can separate yourself from the grid. What do you do after 15 years? You just use it as a girder. There's no upgrade. So I don't think there's an upgrade. At least right now there's no upgrade. Well, can you put it in other devices? And then Dr. Chang shows me his skateboard. He pulls out his skateboard, and he said, yeah, I just put this in the skateboard with the new sensor array that gives me 40% more efficiency because it actually manages the particles in the battery for me. So the same battery that he had conventionally can now have 40% more power. I said, do you have key man insurance? Does your wife allow you to go with the skateboarding around campus? Oh yeah, no problem. And so it's that kind of creativity and inventiveness that's really cool, but it lacks a parent, a catcher, someone to actually take advantage of it, unless by happenstance he happened to sit on a plane one day with a Boeing executive, and that's how that project started, not because he suddenly identified the right person in the company, didn't network. It's happenstance, and it's what people want to do. So there needs to be a qualifier, a navigator, someone in between, and that's sort of what we do, that can see this and figure out the business implications of it and then get it out into the corporates. Here's a classic example of a company that developed the first working electric airplane. So Airbus worked on this. There was a new CTO that came in who changed the direction. Boy, did they learn a lot from this project. It flew from France to England, sounds like the old days, 165 knots power, 25% less fuel cost, almost no fuel cost, it's all electric, 20-minute recharge for turnaround for the aircraft. So there are now companies out there, 9 of them at last count, that are developing regional aircraft that can carry 100 people, electric airplanes. Why isn't Airbus doing it? Well, inside of Airbus, they decided that that particular project would challenge the resources of R&D to do other things, including conventional aircraft, and they couldn't afford it. That's what was said. We can't afford it. So the CTO who developed the project just left and started his own company. And they're back to conventional aircraft. I think they're trying to figure out what to do with the hobby aircraft that they've developed. Meanwhile, 9 other startups have been enabled that are actually past them. How's that possible? Airbus is a great company, tremendously well-organized R&D. So how could they, even when handed this as a possible project, walk away from it long term in a serious manner? I'm not saying, there's still an EFAN project, by the way. Okay, now another radical idea of convergence. This one is called the Solar Road project, and there's about, the plan is to build this into the 2,000-mile section of the interstate, for all intents and purposes, like our interstate, but the Chinese interstate highway connecting the mainland to Europe. It's part of the One Belt strategy on land. So they took the idea of a solar panel from the roof and put it into a road. And the durability that they've been able to achieve is first rate. So they can run a truck, a heavy-duty truck, over this stuff at 75 miles an hour with virtually no impact to the panel itself. And unlike us, when we do potholes and we fill them with asphalt, they basically unscrew the panel and put a new one in. So the initial cost is high, but there's one interesting thing about this is, for every mile of solar road that they build, they generate enough energy for 7,000 homes. Okay, so what's a big problem in China, and one that's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger with this new leader? The big problem in China is when unemployment happens, there's political disturbance. People come from the country into the cities, and that creates political instability for any regime that happens to be in power. And their GDP is starting to drop. So right now, they're looking at maybe 400 million people coming into the cities as a result of this. So this project goal is keep them out of the cities, give them free electricity, build towns along the Beltway. And by the way, take Beijing University and create the equivalent of an American Extension University to teach kids in the villages how to program the highway. What do you mean program the highway? You mean you can do more than just generate energy? Oh yeah. You can take a truck. Remember that thing I showed you at Park? There's a little smart tag up there in the Park slide. Put the smart tag in the package. Keep it 9 feet or lower so that it can communicate with the road. And you can determine what the status and condition of every package is without human intervention in that truck. So suddenly you have a new business model. You can now charge people, instead of going from point A to Z, you can charge them a subscription service to give you condition of the package as it goes across the Gobi Desert, for example. So the smart road can also exchange energy with electric cars backwards and forwards. That's a relatively simple thing that you can do. And so, you know, how did this happen? Well, this is a top priority of the Chinese government. So there isn't an issue around consensus, to put it mildly. If they want something done, it gets built. So we have, in comparison, half a mile of solar road from 10 years ago in Georgia. That's a really unfair statement to make, but I do it for a reason. When you talk to the Department of Transportation or some of it, they're all in favor of doing some research around it, but none of them are in favor of implementation, of operationalizing it yet, and providing government funding at a reasonable level to do this. But instead of doing our toll roads, like for example in the Bay Area, we just eliminated 2 consumer lanes of traffic and put tolls on them at $1 a mile, because that's supposed to reduce congestion. Well, guess what happened? Everybody's moving to the right to get out of the toll roads. So why bother with that kind of a model? Why not put solar roads in there and then take the energy and sell it to the city of Palo Alto or San Mateo or whoever you happen to be near, and have them pay for the roads instead of the consumer? So this is out of the box thinking. And this is something that, you know, with this new technology development is really important. All right. We have about a minute or so left. I have a little bit of wiggle room. This is the last thing I wanted to talk to you about. It's called continuously connected value chain. Everybody's talking about supply chain. It's sort of like going to back almost 10 years. Most of the off-the-shelf software that runs supply chain these days was developed almost 10 years ago, before the advent of new sensor technology. So BMW decided to take a radical diversion. There was an experiment in what was going to be their first car, and the leadership team, which was new, brought in from outside, censored the car so that it could read literally everything, including the driver's habits. But to give you a case example of how it works, I had an i3. I was working with BMW, and they put me on a new beta program without telling me. And so I'm driving along one of the congested highways, going 3 miles an hour, and I crashed into the car in front of me. And because I was texting, of course. And so I go out, I don't see any damage. How does this have to do with supply chain? I don't see any damage. All of a sudden I get a text message within 5 hours of your car has been in an accident. You hit the car at 3.75 miles per hour. No injuries, hopefully. And if you want repair costs, go contact the following dealer the next day. It's about $1,500 minimum to repair your car. So my wife, being my wife, says to me, she didn't ask me anything about the technology. She says, does that actually, your accident stay with the car? So in other words, if you don't repair it, are we going to get, yeah, that's the liability. You can't sell the car. So if I don't repair it, guess what? Goes with the record. Well, you better call them up. Anyway, so we got it fixed. I contacted the vice president of BMW, and so what they're doing is integrating the whole thing. 24/7 consumer device monitoring worldwide and parts performance, which is new. They're measuring how well the parts did in the collision using data sensors. And here's the extraordinary thing about it. They did this without really looking at operating cost very much. There was no forecast. It got almost a 13% decline in operating costs in the very first year of the experiment, which they never anticipated. Do you know what 13% operating profit decline or operating cost decline is to a car company? And what were they doing differently? They were creating a whole new model of convergence, of fully integrated capability, with their car. And now, if you drive a BMW, if you've seen the new iX model SUV, everything is integrated all the way across all the product lines. Even if it's not an electric car, the collision control systems are. So this is sort of the last slide I'm going to show, and then we'll go. I don't know if do we have time for 1 or 2 questions? I don't know. We'll see. The reason that companies have a hard time recruiting talent is this. The model on the left side is what a young engineer would engage with today. It's not about cash comp for a young engineer. It's about equity, getting stock options in a company and being able to explore something really cool as a career path. I call it the Las Vegas casino model of career management. Because essentially what you're doing is you're putting a bet out there that your expertise and capability is going to result in something really positive with the rest of the team. The other side of the house is 95% of what companies do. It's called inside-in model instead of outside-in. And what you do basically is you increment everything. So has anyone seen what's happened with Apple lately? How many people have iPhone 13s, 12s, any iPhone? Should be about half of you because they have 50% market share now. Is the 14 that much more radical an improvement than the 13 was? Has Apple really introduced anything new under the sun since Steve Jobs, who was the left side of the house, left the company? And you've got a superb operations guy in Tim Cook. So this is sort of how cultures play into the dynamic of innovation at top level. So what we do is we also have tools and workshops, new ones, to help companies understand this and make the transition. So with that, I think that ends my session. Any questions? Thank you. I think we have time maybe for two questions. Maybe, maybe not.
Thank you, Mike.
Time for a question or two?
I think we're, exhibit
Okay.
hall opens at 10. Yep. Thank you.